This graph tracks the divergence between Nigeria's 70,000 naira minimum wage and the rapidly accelerating cost of basic survival. This massive gap has forced organized labor to alter its strategy, no longer simply fighting for higher numbers on a paycheck. The president of the Nigeria Labor Congress, Joe Ajaro, has articulated a new doctrine. The primary battle is now for currency stability. A salary is meaningless if the currency itself cannot function as a reliable store of value. Ajaro recently stated that even if Nigerian workers earned 1 million naira a month, it would be, quote, meaningless if the naira has no value. This is known as the nominal wage trap, a macroeconomic condition where systemic currency weakness and severe external shocks completely decouple your salary's numerical value from your physical ability to survive. To understand how this trap closed around the Nigerian workforce, we have to look outward. The immediate catalyst was a localized global energy shock, driven by escalating tensions between the United States and Iran in the Middle East. Historically, a global spike in crude prices would generate export revenue for an oil-producing nation, but due to weak domestic output and a heavy reliance on imported refined products, Nigeria bypassed those benefits. Instead, the country imported the resulting inflation directly to the domestic fuel pump. We need to unpack the exact mechanics of this crisis. We will break down the 1,400 naira energy tax, map how it is fracturing wage policies at the state level, and examine the hyperinflationary risks that currently paralyze a federal response. Macroeconomic volatility is no longer an abstract concern debated in Abuja. It is systematically fracturing local governance and dictating whether individual households can eat. The most aggressive driver of this crisis is the energy tax. This is a regressive, unlegislated levy imposed on the workforce following the surge in petrol prices from 900 to 1,400 naira per liter. Look at this Sankey diagram representing a formal worker's baseline income of 70,000 naira. We can track exactly how a 59% price surge at the pump breaks this budget apart. For a worker relying on public transit, the increased cost of fuel passes directly into their daily commute. That single expense now consumes up to 60. The energy tax operates as an immediate wealth transfer, moving capital from the poorest formal workers directly into external supply chain costs and rendering their nominal wages obsolete. Because the federal government has been unable to stabilize the naira's purchasing power, the concept of a unified nationwide wage structure has shattered. This topological map illustrates the emergence of breakaway states. These are regional governments acting unilaterally to elevate nominal wage benchmarks in a desperate attempt to retain their local labor force. We see this fiscal divergence clearly in the southeast. Imo State has pushed its wage benchmark to 104,000 naira, while neighboring Ebonyi has set theirs at 90,000. But while those states attempt to remain solvent, severe fiscal collapse is occurring at the municipal level elsewhere. Entire local government areas are unable to meet even the baseline federal obligations. This localized insolvency is triggering municipal protests driven by insurmountable shortfalls. In Borno State, the local government deficit has reached 778 million naira. This extreme asymmetry proves that a uniform national economy no longer exists in practice. It has been replaced by a chaotic, fragmented decentralization of labor economics. When adjacent states offer wildly different baseline wages for identical civil service roles, the immediate consequence is a rapid destabilization of the workforce.
This creates an internal brain drain. Skilled, essential workers are logically abandoning defaulting rural councils, drawn toward the higher wages offered by solvent states. This geographic migration vector systematically strips the defaulting local governments of their teachers, their doctors, and their administrative personnel. The federal inflation crisis directly engineers permanent regional inequality, effectively destroying the administrative capacity of rural Nigeria. For the millions of Nigerians in the informal economy and operating small and medium enterprises, the situation is even more precarious. Here, there are no formal safety nets to absorb the shock. These businesses face a severe secondary impact from the energy tax, the staggering reliance on off-grid petrol generators just to sustain basic daily operations. This chart tracks the operational costs of running those generators against consumer demand. Nigerians spend approximately 3.7 trillion naira annually on generator operations. When the price of petrol hits 1,400 naira a liter, that fixed operational cost inflates exponentially. Exactly as those operational costs surge upwards, consumer purchasing power collapses. This dynamic squeezes SME profit margins down to absolute zero. The private sector is forced into a binary choice for survival: attempt to pass proportionately massive cost increases onto consumers whose budgets are already tapped out, or shut down operations entirely. This off-grid energy requirement creates a lethal negative feedback loop. Business closures reduce the supply of available goods, which then further drives up the scarcity and cost of whatever local services remain. If states are fracturing and small businesses are closing, the obvious question is why the federal government doesn't mandate and fund a massive, across-the-board wage hike. The answer lies in the structure of the 2026 federal budget. This 3D bar chart represents the total 68.32 trillion naira federal expenditure, and it exposes a complete lack of fiscal space. The government is trapped by a macro debt collision. Look at the capital required simply to service existing debt obligations. Contrast that with the actual budget allocated to pay the entire federal workforce. Debt servicing now completely exceeds the total recurrent expenditure used for salaries. With a total public debt load of 155.1 trillion naira, funding a sweeping national wage hike through external borrowing is not a viable option. Attempting to do so would trigger an immediate sovereign default. The alternative is to fund wages through monetary expansion, literally printing money. But injecting liquidity into an environment with virtually no supply-side buffers guarantees a rapid hyperinflationary spiral. The federal government is mathematically paralyzed. The debt-to-revenue ratio has entirely consumed the fiscal space required to execute a monetary bailout for the workforce. The administration's primary strategy for breaking this economic deadlock has shifted away from debating nominal wage figures, focusing instead on long-term capital investment. The 2026 budget allocates 32.2 trillion naira specifically for capital expenditure, placing a heavy, strategic focus on national infrastructure and electrical grid stabilization. The structural logic behind this policy is straightforward. The only way to organically restore the purchasing power of the naira is to physically decouple the domestic economy from the volatility of global petrol prices. Successfully fixing the grid infrastructure deletes that 3.7 trillion naira generator tax, currently strangling small businesses. It radically lowers the cost of domestic production without the need for hyperinflationary money printing. Until this macro debt collision is structurally resolved and infrastructural resilience is finally achieved, any negotiation over nominal wage figures remains a mathematical illusion. Without addressing the root cost of production, the workforce remains trapped on a hyperinflationary precipice.